what's going on, y'all? How we feeling? This is I don't know what this is. This is pod episode 3. Pod episode number 3, I think. Um, welcome back. Welcome back to the pod. If you're new, welcome to the pod. This is the Still Called Pod. Excited to have y'all here. Excited to be here with you and talk about this topic that we're talking about today because I feel I've been going through a lot of this. I know a lot of us are going through a lot of this too, and that is the topic of disappointment. That's the topic of confusion. That is the topic of feeling delayed, feeling like you are in a time of delay, in a season of delay, where either nothing is going your way, or you don't understand what's going on, or you don't feel like there's a reason as to why you're going through what you're going through, and just it being challenging to keep moving forward, it being challenging to trust God, even though it's like nothing around you points to the fact that anything will change. I think this. For anyone who's feeling this, for you, it may be a season of feeling like you have to walk by faith and not by sight. Um, and that is what our faith is built on. That is what our entire faith is dependent on, is walking by faith and not by sight. But that can be challenging, especially when we're feeling disappointed, especially when we're feeling like we're not seen, especially when we're feeling forsaken and abandoned and misunderstood and confused and like we're delayed. It's a bunch of things. It's a bunch of feelings that we get, and it feels like a whole whirlwind of emotion. So I want to talk about that. I want to talk about three particular uh, stories or events that took place in the Bible that I think are helpful in the conversation of confusion and disappointment and delay. Um, so, first of all, I want to go to Genesis 16 and talk about Sarai and Hagar. I don't think I'm going to read these stories in full, but pretty much what happens is God comes to Abram and Sarai. He's like, "Yo, you're gonna have a kid." Meanwhile, these people are like they old. They like 90 something. Abram's like 100 something, I think, at this point in time. He's like, "Yo, y'all gonna have a kid." And they're thinking this is impossible because they're so old. But God is like, look, this is going to happen. What they didn't know is that it took a good little minute. It took a minute for that promise to come to pass. And as the years went by, I'm sure that they felt confused. I'm sure that they felt disappointed. I'm sure that they felt lack of clarity on if they heard God or not and how it's going to happen and all the things. So as time is going on and on and on, Sarai gets this great idea, and she's like, yo, and this is in Genesis 16. She's like, now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had a female Egyptian servant whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said to Abram, behold, now the Lord has prevented me from bearing children. Go into my servant. Go into my servant. It may be that I shall obtain children by her. And so essentially, Sarai gave Hagar over to her husband Abram to have sex with her and conceive the child, because she thought that this would be the way that the child would come about. Meanwhile, God didn't say none of that, but this is what she thought. Just out of frustration, out of disappointment, out of confusion. This is the conclusion that they came to. And so Abram does just that. He goes and he sleeps with Hagar. Hagar gets pregnant. But then she runs away. She runs away because Sarai started to look at Hagar with hatred, even though that she's the one who told Hagar to sleep with Abram. But she starts to look on Hagar with contempt. And so Hagar flees from them. And around verse 7, she's in the wilderness, and she's walking. I don't know where she's going. I think she's on her way back to Egypt, but she's walking, and the Lord stops her and asks her a very intentional question. And at that point in time, she feels acknowledged by God. I want to talk mostly about Hagar, and I want to talk about how she may have been feeling in the moment, because I used to read this story and I used to just focus on Abram and Sarai and how they took matters into their own hands and tried to make God's plan fit into theirs. Kind of, and go about it in their own way because the promise was taking too long to come, and so they did what they thought was best in their eyes. But something that I disregarded was Hagar, which is funny because in this passage Hagar is disregarded. In this passage she is mistreated. In this passage she is probably left feeling disappointed and used by both her mistress and by Abram. And I'm sure she was going through a lot of distress in this moment. In fact, something that I also found interesting is that Hagar doesn't actually speak until verse 8. When God asks her that question, Hagar doesn't actually have a moment to actually speak and express how she's feeling because she wasn't given the opportunity to. And I'm sure that felt disappointing. I'm sure that made her feel like she's less than. I'm sure that made her feel as though what she had to say and what her opinion was in the matter was invalid. But God meets her in verse 8, and he asks her a very intentional and important question, which I think is really amazing. It says, "And he said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" And he asks her this like he doesn't know. But I think the really cool thing about God is that he wants to process with us. He wants to go through our feelings of disappointment. He wants to go through our feelings of confusion. He wants to go through that entire process with us. So even though he knew all these things about Hagar, where she was going. He knew what had happened to her. He takes the time to ask her, "Where are you going? Where have you come from?" Not for the sake of him trying to gain knowledge, but for the sake of her knowing that someone is actually listening and someone actually cares and somebody actually is asking her opinion, asking her how she feels. And so he asks her, "Where have you come from and where are you going?" And then she said, "I am fleeing from my mistress Sarai." And the angel of the Lord said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her." The angel of the Lord also said to her, "I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude." And then it goes on and it starts to prophesy about the son that she's going to bear and what the son is going to be like. And I'll stop there for now. Something very interesting is that she is feeling these feelings of disappointment. She's feeling these feelings of confusion, most likely. Again, it doesn't say this. I'm trying to picture what she might be feeling in this moment. And she's trying to run away from her mistress who has mistreated her. But God meets her there, acknowledges her existence and is asking her these questions. And God says to her, "Go back to your mistress." And I'm sure in this moment she's confused. I'm sure in this moment she's like, "What do you mean go back? I've been mistreated. I've been abused. I've been misused. I've been left to feel disappointed and invalidated in that circumstance, in that situation. And you want me to go back? You want me to go back to that place?" And that's what the Lord says. That's what the Lord tells her, is to go back and submit to her mistress. At the same time, God also gives her a promise that is attached to it. God also gives her a blessing that is attached to her surrender and obedience in this area, even though it's difficult. I think something that's also interesting is that Hagar is a servant, right? And God be speaking to the people and using the people that we think is like the least likely for him to use. She's a servant, and God initially gave, God gave a promise to Abram and Sarai, who are, the people that God wanted to bring that promise through. Um, and they are the people that the Lord chose in that scenario. They are the people that God wanted to use in that situation. And so it can almost feel like God is prioritizing them, or God is God is making them seem like they're more important than Hagar, because Hagar's a servant. God didn't give a promise to Hagar. She is just kind of in the background of this entire story. She doesn't even speak until verse 8, and this whole passage has 16 verses. But God gives a promise to someone who feels forgotten, to someone who feels abandoned, to someone who feels forsaken and mistreated, and to somebody who is also an Egyptian, somebody who is not only that, but is also a servant. God gives that promise to her as well. And in response to this, she says in verse 13, so she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, "You are a God of seeing." For she said, "Truly, here I have seen him who looks after me." And the Hebrew of what she said, "You are a God of seeing," is El Roy, the God who sees, the God of seeing. And as I started to look at it in this lens, I thought that was really interesting, because that's what she has been lacking. That's what she has felt that she had not received when she was back with Abram and Sarai, that she wasn't seen, that no one asked her for her opinion or wanted to initiate conversation with her. She just had to do what was being, what she was told to do. But God, who is not only above Abram and Sarai, but above the entire world, asks her and initiates conversation with her. God is the one who initiated that conversation with her. And he asks her, "Where are you going? Where have you come from?" And he gives her a hard command, but he also gives her a promise. And at the end of that, she realizes and comes to a moment where she acknowledges that she's seen, where she acknowledges that she's been acknowledged by God, even though she hasn't been acknowledged by people. Another story I want to talk about is the story of Hannah, who constantly went to the temple year after year and couldn't conceive. And she would pray and pray and pray and pray. And over the years, I'm sure she felt disappointed. I'm sure she felt forgotten by God, because at the same time, her husband, Elkanah, also had another wife. I forgot her name. I think it's Penina or Penina, something like that. And she had children, but Hannah did not. And so I'm sure she's asking herself questions like, what's wrong with me? Why can't I have a kid? Why am I not conceiving? Why is my promise not coming to pass, but hers is? And at the same time, Penina, we're going to keep using Penina because I don't know if it's her, but that's the only name that's coming to mind. Penina, she would rub this in Hannah's face too, year after year, because she's having kids and she's like, "You can't have kids. Look at my kids. I'm blessed. My womb is fruitful," all the things. And I'm sure that was difficult. I'm sure that was hard. And she also came to a point where she was praying and she was before the Lord, and she said, "God, if you give me this kid, I'll give it back to you. I'll give this kid back to you." And again, like the last story, there's a hard moment there. This wasn't a command, but this one was a moment of sacrifice. There's a hard moment there where she's feeling disappointed, she's feeling distraught, she's feeling forgotten, but she is still looking to God and trusting the Lord and saying, "If you give me this blessing, I will give it back to you." Um, and that's incredible. That's incredible. So I'm gonna go to my last one, and then I'll try to tie it all up together. The last example is Jesus on the cross, who had been sent by the Father from heaven, to die for the sins of the world, to become the Savior of the world, but also Lord of all creation. So he's hanging on the cross, knowing exactly who he is, knowing that he is the Son of God, knowing that he was commissioned by God to come and fulfill this purpose. And he's being persecuted and crucified on a cross for the people that he was sent to die for. And on that cross, at that moment, he's saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? I'm sure he's feeling disappointed. I'm sure he's feeling forsaken. He's feeling confused. He's feeling hurt. He's feeling abandoned. In fact, before this event actually happens, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, sweating tears of blood because he's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to go through with this. But if this is what you want from me, then fine, I'll do it. And he goes to the cross and he dies for the sins of the world and is obedient to God in the midst of his disappointment, in the midst of his pain and confusion. But something that I also notice here is that there was also sacrifice for great blessing as well. He sacrificed his entire life for us to receive the blessing of his obedience. So the common theme that I'm seeing in all of these three stories is that even though there's great disappointment, even though there's confusion, even though there's delay, even though there's hurt involved, there's mistreatment involved, there's a lack of hope and a loss of faith and feeling the presence of God. God is still present in every one of these scenarios. He's present, but he's present in different ways. God is still present, and he's still the God who sees us, and he's still the God who offers us a promise, even in our time of discontentment, even in our time of pain and struggle. Something that I'm also seeing is that attached to the promise that he gives, there's also a difficulty provided, that's separate from the initial feeling of feeling disappointment or feeling confused or feeling delayed. It's like there's a separate thing that is either a command or is a sacrifice to be given as well. And to tie it all together, here's what I realize. What I realize is that when we are in seasons of disappointment, when we are in seasons of delay, when we're in times of hurt and pain and confusion and we're distraught, we often want to give up. But God actually does his best work in times when we feel that he is gone. He actually does his best work in times when we feel that we are abandoned. That's actually when he's most present. In times where we need to acknowledge that we are weak, but he is strong, those are times where we feel strength that we can't even comprehend. We didn't even know that we could have that sort of strength in this time that we're in because it's so difficult. And when we're met in the wilderness, and in the toughness of our season, that's where God wants to come and change the situation and refresh us in that moment, so that it could only be God in that moment who receives glory. And we know within ourselves that we didn't get to a point, or get over that point without God. It had to be God. It had to be his hand. It had to be God. And that is honestly insane. That is honestly insane. I feel that God, in the midst of our pain, there's also purpose connected to it. In the midst of God meeting Hagar and telling her that she must return to her mistress, there was purpose in that. In the midst of Hannah going back to the temple year after year and praying, and even being willing to sacrifice what she had been praying for all these years, what she had been wanting the most. There's purpose in that. In the midst of Jesus dying, even though he didn't want to go through that pain, even though he felt forsaken and forgotten by God on the cross, he went through with it, and there was purpose in that pain. Everything that we do go through, all the disappointments that we go through, all the challenges that we go through, the trials and the tribulations that we go through, they're not for no reason. There's a purpose to the pain that we're going through. The will of God is our sanctification, and sanctification often includes difficulty. It often includes us going through a time that we don't really want to go through because it's hard. But if you really think about it, when things are easy, there's there's usually no opportunity for growth, because a lot of the time when things are easy, we're not reliant on God the way that we should be. We're not leaning in to God the way that we should be, or the way that we would when things were difficult. When things are difficult, when there is confusion, when there is disappointment, when there is delay, we are brought to the end of ourselves. And that's honestly where the Lord wants us to be, because apart from Him, we can do nothing. And in those times, we see strength that we didn't know we had. We see peace that we didn't know we had. We see joy that we didn't know we had. But that's because God is working in and through us, even in the time where we feel empty and we feel like we don't have nothing to give. God is still in those moments, and He's still working in those moments and moving and growing us through those moments, even though it doesn't feel like it. So from these stories, I kind of also get I kind of also get just a few things that we could take from this. A few things that we could understand from this in moving forward with it. And the first one is that there's purpose in pain. The first one is that when we're going through these tough seasons and God is not changing the situation, He actually wants to change us. He doesn't want to just go through the situation. He wants us to grow through the situation. He wants us to be able to see the giant that's in front of us and not cower and not fear, but to receive power and grace to overcome that giant. The giant, the trial, the temptation, all the things, they're not meant to destroy us. They're meant to grow us. They're meant to promote us. They're meant to allow us to come to a point of surrender so that we can receive strength. We actually receive strength when we surrender, which is insane. We receive the grace to overcome and be stronger than we ever could be when we actually surrender. Just crazy. There's purpose in pain. There's purpose in the pain that we go through. Another thing is that when we are in these seasons of confusion, when we're in these seasons of disappointment, when we're in these seasons of delay, something else that we could realize is that God is actually preparing us for the weight of a blessing. And He wants us to go through this process because He doesn't, not because He wants us to go through pain, but because He wants us to be refined and sanctified and pruned. We're going through this process because there's more that is coming ahead. There's more that He wants us to experience and grow in, not just for ourselves, but also for other people. And the things that we are going through and growing through, there's a time where we would also be able to help others go through and grow through that same thing because we've been through that same thing. We are able to bless as we have been blessed and encourage as we have been encouraged, because God has met us in those places where we were lowly and where we were disappointed and where we were hurt and where we were struggling. God has been able to impart something into us that we can then impart into other people as well. Something I'll say as well is that when we're going through these seasons of disappointment, we can't go through it alone. We can't go through it by ourselves. And we have to talk to God and we have to talk to people too. We have to be willing to not be just honest with God, but also with people. And in that honesty, especially with God, we have to be willing to let Him know exactly how it is that we're feeling. When I look in the Psalms, I see prayers of strength, prayers of surrender, prayers of pain, confusion, prayers of sorrow, to the point where someone's at their end, and still there's a turning point in that prayer that goes, but God, I still trust in you. God, I still believe in you. God, I'm still hopeful for the more in this. And when we're praying to the Lord, I think these moments of disappointment and seasons of confusion help us to give God our most honest prayers, because one, He already sees them, um, and He already knows exactly how we feel. But two, like He met Hagar, He wants to have conversation with us, not because He doesn't know, but because He wants us to realize that He's there. He's there even in the moments where we have our darkest thoughts. He's there in the moments even when we are incredibly disappointed and confused. And He wants us to voice that to Him. He wants to show us that He's actually present in our lowest moment. He's not looking for a performative moment when we're great. He's actually also present now and here in disappointment, when we're feeling that we don't got anything to give, and when we're feeling that we are not good enough or where we should be. Those are the moments where He wants to show up and us be like, you are the God of seeing. You are El Roy and you see me here. And overall, this is kind of the same point too, but believing that there is hope for the future and that our stories don't end here. God is writing the story. He's continually writing the story. And something that we should not do is take the pen away from Him. Otherwise, we would not know how that story ends. We would not receive the growth of what the season is trying to produce. We would not receive the blessing that is supposed to come from this. And we would not receive the intimacy and just personal even self-awareness, honestly, of how we're growing through things and how the Lord has met us in seasons of difficulty. He's teaching us how to consistently and honestly rely on Him and trust that He is the one who is growing us, and trust that He is the one who is watering us and giving us strength and giving us hope for the new day. And helping us overcome the trials and the disappointment that we go through. He is the one who is doing that. He's the one who is initiating that. He is the one who is sustaining that. To anybody who's going through a time of disappointment, who's going through a time of confusion, or even a time of delay, you should know that you're not alone. You should know that you are not forsaken, that you haven't been abandoned by God. You should know that He sees you in the moment that you're in right now. He sees the disappointment that you're going through. He sees the trial that you're facing, but He also knows that you're going through this for a reason. He also sees beginning from the end, and He knows that this is a necessary part of your growth and a necessary part of your development, because God is more concerned about our sanctification and about our development and our growth, rather than where we would want to be, which is in easy places, which is in easy moments and easy spots in life. But there would be no growth. There would be no trust in God. There will be no dependence on God. And so know that these seasons aren't useless. They're actually useful. Know that these seasons aren't meant to destroy you. They're actually meant to transform you and grow you. This is not going to be the thing that kills you. This is going to be the thing that shows you that God is who he actually says he is, that God is actually strong enough for you. He's actually strong enough to sustain you. He's strong enough to help you get through whatever it is that you're going through. And that this is a time where God is refining, God is molding, and God is preparing for a purpose that we can't even see yet. And he's preparing for us to not only be impacted through this season and have a revelation of who God is in a different way, but also preparing us to be able to help other people who are going through similar things so that we can be a blessing just as he has been a blessing to us. So that's the episode. I hope that this has been encouraging. I hope that this has blessed you. And I hope that you stay encouraged. I hope that you know that God sees you, God loves you, God wants to continue walking with you, and that even through the disappointment, there's a reason for this. So again, I'm praying. I'm praying that this helped you, and we're gonna keep growing, and God is gonna keep showing up in ways that we didn't anticipate that he would. So again, thanks for being here. I'll catch y'all in the next episode. Peace.
It's been a while, yeah, tears fell, but I'm still here, it's all well. Struggle, still going, still real, but I got a new hope that I feel. It's been a while, yeah, tears fell, but I'm still here, it's all well.